Hello everyone, and welcome to a series where we talk about object-oriented design patterns. Today I will talk about the creational abstract factory pattern. This pattern is used to create related objects that make sense when paired without knowing their concrete class. Imagine you are in a video game that changes eras. We have the medieval period and the futuristic period. Rather than creating a medieval guard, a medieval peasant, and a medieval merchant separately using factories, we can group them up with this pattern. This pattern also ensures that we will not end up mixing people from different eras. For this example, let's say we're in the Lord of the Rings world. We will use the NPC's class hierarchy that we introduced in the factory video, including the Goblin class and the Orc class. We will also introduce an Elf and a Dwarf class. If you are not familiar with Lord of the Rings lore, we could group up the Orcs and the Goblins as evil, and the Elves and Dwarves as good forces. There are at least two ways to introduce the pattern that I will mention later when writing the actual code, but for now, let's assume that we want to make a stronghold, and the stronghold will either have good or evil allegiance, meaning that it can only contain Orcs and Goblins, or Dwarves and Elves. As you may have noticed, we will be using again the NPCs and the NPCs factories from the factory video. If you haven't seen the video, there will be a link in the description below. Here are the NPCs factories, the Goblin factory, the Orc factory. They create new Goblins and Orcs. And what we're gonna do is create a new NPC, an Elf, that is going to extend the NPC. I think I misspelled something. Again, we're going to create the Dwarf NPC. And create or rather implement their attack methods. The Dwarf is attacking and the Elf is attacking. Now something's wrong here. Trying to figure it out. Yeah, of course, there's no public with capital P. So now everything should be right. Now it builds. So what's next? We're going to create, or rather not create, factories for the Dwarf and the Elf class, or rather not use them. We're gonna create the abstract factory class Forces Factory. This factory class, this abstract factory class, it's gonna create two types of NPCs. A stout and sturdy one. It's gonna be purely virtual. And a swift and agile. Okay. So now we can extend this abstract factory class. Let's call that Mordor Armies. Again, Lord of the Rings lore. It extends the abstract factory. And the Gondor armies. I know the Gondor armies do not have elves and dwarves, but bear with me here. This is just an example. Okay, so all we're doing here is implementing the abstract methods of the abstract factory. And now, I told you before that there will be two ways to implement the abstract factory pattern. The Mordor armies will use factories, while the Gondor armies will not. Yeah. So, the Mordor armies are gonna have a Goblin factory and an Orc factory. This is gonna make your code a little more complex, but we're using more and more patterns in this way, and when you're familiar with them, it's gonna look a little bit cleaner. So if you remember, the Orc factory is gonna return a new Orc. And the Goblin factory is gonna create a new Goblin. That's not the way that we're gonna implement the Gondor armies though. Here we see that the factories will produce an NPC. So now, the Gondor armies will create a dwarf when creating a stout and sturdy NPC, and an elf when creating a swift and agile NPC. Let's try them and see what's going on. We are creating a Mordor armies object and the Gondor armies object. Now, the Mordor armies will create an orc, which is gonna attack. Remember that the attack is going to return a string, so let's print that. What am I missing? Oh yeah, there's a semicolon there. So Mordor armies create swift and agile attack. This is going to also return a string. And do the same thing for Gondor armies. Now, let's see that running in action. As you can see, an orc is attacking, and a goblin is attacking, and a dwarf is attacking, and an elf is attacking. In order to put that into perspective, let's say that we have the Stronghold class. The Stronghold class... What am I doing? What am I doing wrong? Oh, yeah. Curly brackets. Okay. So, the Stronghold class will create an army, and it will take as an argument an abstract factory, a forces factory. Now, if that was sorry about that. If that was client code or a library code, and we couldn't see what's going on behind the lines, and we only had an interface with create army, then that would be the only way to do it. So we now have create army. Let's erase those. Let's create a stronghold. And for the sake of simplicity, I call it Mordor. Create army, Mordor forces, Mordor armies, actually. No, I use Mordor again. I'll use Mordor again. Again, bear with me. I know this is not correct lore-wise, but this is an example. Same thing. So we successfully built an abstract factory.